This episode, Dr. Jeff Porter, Mark Hotchkin, and I spend time with three experts on sustainability in sport. The future of sport venues are intertwined with smart cities where you can live, work, play, and learn. It's going beyond being green or net carbon neutral. Teams engaging communities, addressing housing, education, health and wellness, energy, nutrition and food systems, transportation, 5G connectivity, data, and so much more. Stay tuned to learn all about it. I'd like to introduce you to Scott Jenkins. How are you doing, Scott?
I'm doing great now that I'm unmuted.
Hey, we're getting that out early in the podcast. That's great. And then secondly, we have Chris Castro. How are you doing, Chris?
Doing well, Keel. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. It's awesome to see you. We met back at UCF. We're both UCF alumni. So I think that's special for the students to know you got your start in student government. And we'll share a little bit about that here in a bit. And third, last but not least, we have Terry Cecil. So Terry, how are you doing?
Excellent. Fantastic to be on such a great panel.
Glad to have you here. So, you know, one of the questions that I think will be brought up by our students in class is, what is sustainability? You know, there's so much going on in the industry right now and so many good things. But before we talk through this podcast today of sustainability in sport, you know, let's just set a definition for our students here of what sustainability is. Could one of you take a shot at that?
Sure, I'll take the first attempt at this, and a little history. This concept of sustainability really came out back in the 80s through a United Nations Brundtland report that really looked at how do we move humanity in a more positive direction. And it really defined itself around meeting the needs of today without compromising the needs of future generations and the ability for those generations to excel. And, you know, when we come down to the core of my work in the city of Orlando as our Director of Sustainability and Resilience, it's about figuring out a new paradigm shift in how we think and how we govern and run our business to really look at what we call the triple bottom line: people, planet, and our collective prosperity. And so it's a different perspective, and not just looking at the single bottom line of does this make dollars and cents, but also how does it impact public health, social equity, how does it impact natural resources and the environment, of which are fully dependent upon for a good and robust and vibrant economy. Often we talk about the economy being a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. And so often environmental factors haven't been at the forefront of a lot of decisions, whether it's investment decisions, whether it's how we, again, govern, but sustainability is coming to the forefront and really changing our perspective and realizing that in order to make any given decision, we have to look at it from this triple bottom line perspective. How does it impact public and social issues? How does it impact the environmental issues? And most certainly, how do we continue to thrive in a robust economy?
Chris, that was great. I'm glad you led off because you hit the key points. But I'll add one kind of construct to it that's been relatively recent in my learning. And when we think about sports and sustainability, we tend to talk about the good things we're doing. We're getting more energy efficient. We're using less water. We're recycling more waste. We're encouraging public transportation and biking to the game and whatnot. And so when we're on that kind of continuum from where we are now to where we're going, I think business as usual is really in a state of degradation where we're using up the environment, we're polluting it, we're taking our natural resources. And my initial thought of sustainability is we're getting in the direction of neutrality where we're doing no harm. So we're kind of starting from a point of bad, getting better. And so if you were to get a LEED certified building, obviously you're heading in the right direction and it's better than business as usual. But we're not anywhere near to neutral, and neutral is not good enough. We actually have to be beneficial and regenerative. So when you cross that line from bad to less bad to neutral, when I think of sustainability, I really think of the natural world as being beneficial and regenerative. And so that's a really good framework that I've been starting to wrap my head around while we pat ourselves on the back about the good things we do, switching to LED lighting, having electric cars, you know, achieving zero waste. Those are all good things. but largely less bad and not anywhere close to where we need to be. We keep using up things. So as we talk about people, planet, and profits, those are really important things to hit. And that's the sweet spot of anything we do. We need to do good on all three fronts. But I think if we can think about it as a continuum of aiming to get neutral, but again, beneficial and regenerative is really the mindset that we need to operate on.
Yeah, that's both of you. That's a fantastic look at sustainability. And from a sponsor standpoint, we work with corporations and try to look through the lens of sustainability. Sustainability is really the degree of sustainable development. So at what degree are these companies really committing to? And I think historically, you've got the environmental lens that people look at, but it's very important for this formulaic value to really integrate all three lenses. Good examples, I think, with technology. You can have the environmental impact of e-waste and the energy needed to increase our technology commitments. But then on the social pillar, you look at digital divide. Do we have access for all communities? So I think it's very important that we look at all three pillars equally to go forward on any kind of development. But it's something that hasn't been around that long. I mean, we're looking at a little over a decade where it really started coming into play. Went kind of silent for a while, but now, due to your work and others, we're making great inroads, and we have to parallel that with development. So it's exciting time for youth too to go into this as a profession and see the impact we can make together. And it's going to take a lot of collaboration on all sides.
Well, Terry, that leads me into kind of my first question, and hearing your background and hearing all of you talk, especially about when we talk about the triple bottom line, the benefits of being, trying to get back to neutral. How did you guys get your start in sustainability? Why was that something that you gravitated towards as your career trajectory?
So so my story really starts back when I was a kid. I grew up down in Miami, Florida. I was fortunate to be raised on a palm tree nursery and got a different upbringing than most, kind of getting to connect with the natural world in a different way. Then I graduated and came up to Orlando to study at the University of Central Florida and got really excited about, at the time, the administration's interest in addressing climate change. I was one of the students that really put pressure on the UCF administration to commit to carbon neutrality and sign a major document called the American College and Universities President's Climate Commitment. And from there was quickly put on the President's Sustainability Advisory Committee to build out our plan, and got really passionate about getting students of all disciplines engaged in advancing a cleaner, healthier, more sustainable future. And so with that, created a nonprofit organization called Ideas for Us, very focused on this interdisciplinary group of students coming to develop solutions to these issues. And I'm happy to say that over the course of the last going on 13 years, that organization, although started at UCF as a student organization, has grown to an international NGO with operations in over 30 countries around the world, really implementing local sustainability action projects for communities. And then, little by little started to excel, started my own company in the clean energy space, and over the last 6 years have been working and advising our mayor, Buddy Dyer, here in Orlando, and leading the charge on really elevating Orlando's prominence in how to find that balance between social equity around environmental protection and continuing to grow our jobs and our economy in this region.
And I started, let's see, where did my interest start? Really in school. I studied construction administration at the University of Wisconsin. And so studied a little bit of engineering, mostly business, got out of school and started managing commercial real estate properties. And so I really started to think about efficiency and operations and taking care of our guests, but doing it from a financially responsible way. Not so much about environmental at that point, but there was definitely some things in school, studying some environmental sciences classes that planted the seed. And being a track and cross country runner and enjoying the outdoors, I always appreciated being out. I grew up in Wisconsin, along the shore of Lake Michigan. So I always had an appreciation for the natural beauty. Then I went to work for the state of Wisconsin, running state office buildings, managing properties there. And there I started to really hone in on doing things for the public good, serving people, serving the public. And so efficiency was a big part of that. When I went to the University of Wisconsin Athletic Department and started running their events, that's when it really woke me up to go, wow, this is really wasteful. I mean, this is awesome that 78,000 people come to a football game, but the carnage and the waste afterwards is unbelievable, and the amount of people descending on the city. And so I really felt like there was a responsibility to do what I could do to at least clean up after it. And so I started to connect the dots on how sports could influence our fans and how we could run sports facilities efficiently. I then went to Milwaukee and worked for the Brewers while we built Miller Park, started some recycling programs there, but again, really out of a sense of responsibility and just taking care of the environment and still being bothered by all the consumption. Then I ended up going to Philadelphia and working for the Luries and opening up Lincoln Financial Field for the Eagles. And there, the owners were really interested in advocating environmental issues. And so as we opened up the stadium in the first year, we started talking about what would a comprehensive sustainability program look like for a professional sports team and a stadium that hosts large events. And so we created a program called Go Green, and that was in 2004. And that's really where I started to become a student of sustainability in sports and tried to learn what are our impacts, how can we lessen them, what is climate change and how important is it? And at that time, most people really weren't aware of it. And to even talk about it was very nerdy, and most people just weren't aware of it. From Philadelphia, I went to Seattle and worked at Safeco Field where the Mariners play, which is now a different name. But while I was there, I took some of those things that I learned and some of the relationships I had from the Philly project and the new folks that I met in Seattle, in Portland, and we formed the Green Sports Alliance and kicked off a nonprofit organization in 2011. So we're about 10 years old now, and we had 6 teams in 5 venues. And today we have 400 plus members. All the leagues are members, a growing collegiate membership. We've got international members. And if you look back over the 10 years, we've matured quite a bit. And again, on the continuum from business as usual to less bad, we've come a long ways in the less bad. And people are waking up now to what climate change really is and what a serious issue it is. And almost everybody is in the game at their venue, their team, the league office, the fans. And we're kind of pointing in the direction of neutral and realizing our trajectory really needs to go way past that. And so we've come a long way in 10 years, but I think we've realized we've got a really long ways to go, and we've got a really powerful platform because we can influence millions and millions of people. And from what I see here, even just surveying our fans in the Atlanta market, people are ready for this now. 10 years ago, we felt like we were kind of pioneers trying to create the conversation. And quite honestly, between people, planet, and profits, our conversation was largely around profits and efficiency, especially within the league, the teams. And now I think the people and the planet are front and center, and the profits just come along for the ride. So we're doing it for the right reasons, and our fan base is very much supportive of these initiatives. So much so that I'll give you a little example. We survey our fans after every event, and we had 2 Monster Jam events at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in middle of February. So we had 90,000 people come through the building, cheering and screaming for really loud trucks zooming up and down, the field. And you wouldn't think that's exactly a environmentally minded group, but along with our experience questions, we dropped in some questions because we're about to push forward on a big zero waste initiative at the stadium. We wanted to test what our fans would think about it. And 86% of the fans said that our zero waste program was important or very important to them. And that's a Monster Jam show. And when we survey our Falcons fans and United fans, the numbers are in the high 90s. So the people are expecting it, they're receptive to it. And if you'd asked me 10 years ago where the sentiment would have been, it would have been way, way less. And so if people are that receptive to it now, we can use our leadership position and our mouthpiece to really drive innovation, drive change, and drive behavior change, not just in our venues, but in our communities. So it's really exciting to see what's happened in 10 years. And as I said, along the continuum, 10 years ago, we were pretty much just bad. Today, we know we need to get to neutral. I hope 10 years from now, we're looking at how are we regenerative and how are we beneficial.
Uh, I started, I think, in a unique position like Chris. As a youth, I was impacted with mostly the social pillar of sustainability, and that kind of guided my career. My father was charged. He was with the he's with the Milwaukee Braves, and he was charged with moving the franchise down to Atlanta and building Atlanta Stadium. He looked at creating other events, created the Atlanta Chiefs, and was a founder of the NESL. Put on the Beatles and dozens of concerts.
Wow.
And during that time, it was a tumultuous time for Atlanta, obviously with civil rights. So my parents really embraced the leadership in civil rights and supported Dr. King and Coretta. Worked. My dad was the economic campaign manager for Andy Young, second time he ran, and my parents worked very hard to get him elected. My mother marched at Selma. It was a very tumultuous time that was unique to really grab leadership and run with it, because there was it wasn't in favor at that time. When my father created the Atlanta Chiefs soccer team, he looked at the impact of the '66 World Cup in England and said, this is going to be good for the country. Went and signed players in England, but then went on and went to Africa and signed Kaiser Motong and a number of Africans, which if someone had said you're going to go sign African players to play in Atlanta during the height of civil rights, they'd say you're crazy. But Atlanta at that time, it's a microcosm for what it is today, because they embraced it. And you look at today, it's amazing what Arthur Blank, Scott, you guys have created with Atlanta United, a very diverse pool of people who have come together. And I think that's what Atlanta represents. But I saw this when I was around 10. My father had someone who had flown in for his guidance. And it was a man with tears running down his face, and it was Kurt Flood. He trusted my dad's opinion, and that started my awareness of decisions that had to be made. It risked Kurt's career, but these were changes going on. And so that guided me. I worked for IMG, Octagon. I've worked for a lot of companies. I've sold a lot of properties. But the inner feeling for me was never a satisfaction in doing deals just for money. It was, what more can we do with these deals? And so when I founded the International Sponsor Council, one of the things I noticed, University of Georgia, back in about 2009, I think it was, they had a game against South Carolina, and the fans had left 40 tons of trash on the quad, the North Quad. And I looked at this and I said, there's got to be a better way. So I looked at how we can transfer this into energy, and stumbled upon plasma gasification, which deassociates on a molecular level and doesn't use incineration, but uses plasma to break this down. And you get syngas, electricity, or steam through this. And I said, why can't we do things like this on site? Recycle as much as you can, but use a platform where we can turn this back into energy and put it back on the grid. And from there, I went to Japan and tried to use this to help with Fukushima, the damage after Fukushima. I looked at plastic ocean pollution. That was over 10 years ago. So I think we had a great focus back then. We went silent a little while, and now it's exciting to see so many people are coming together. And Scott made a great point. It's going to carry me through the day and beyond. It's not about getting back to neutral. It's about regeneration and what we can do to make it more positive. So I've been really moved and committed to seeing how sports and other sponsorship, other verticals, sports, music, entertainment, world challenges, how corporations can come in and really change their dynamics to provide, I think, the most effective positive impact they can make. And this is enormous. I think sports has got to change with it. One of the problems with sports that I've seen is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We've been so successful as an industry making change that can pull back a little bit and put it in a different direction. It's not always easy. And I know all you guys know what I'm talking about on that one. So but I think the timing's right now. It reminds me of the chaos back in '68. We're going through so much right now that the most we can do is offer some guidance, and again, this collaboration where people feel like we're moving forward together. And I think sustainability as a platform can do that for us. So it's exciting to see all this work come together.
Yeah, I think a few of you guys touched on one of the things that I think is most important about sports, or most really special about sports, is how it can help the society as a whole evolve and for the better. And if you take that, you know, what Scott, you said about the last 10 years, there really being a big change in the way that sports organizations are approaching it. I'd be curious from all of your perspective, who are the leaders? Who do you look out and see like, hey, these guys are really doing it right? These guys are setting trends.
In terms of leaders in this space as it relates to sports, I will say that the work that Scott's been doing up in Atlanta with Mercedes-Benz is probably the platinum standard at this point in time, right? From a venue's perspective and how responsible they were with that construction and what they do, it continues to get stellar reviews. Down in the city of Orlando, we were the first LEED Gold multi-purpose arena, still is in the country, where the Orlando Magic play. And we worked really hard to ensure not only that we were incorporating high performance, but we, from an operational and maintenance perspective, how we can continue to evolve and improve this facility over the years. We've done a lot to incorporate, different sustainability measures, whether it's waste diversion, food waste collection, some of those more simple things, but then also looking at how do we power a facility of this size with clean, renewable sources of energy. And so there's a lot of, I often look to Mercedes-Benz as probably the leading venue in the country at this point in time in terms of trying to find that balance and really make a showcase of what we should be doing, what we should be building, and how we should be approaching sports venues.
Chris, I appreciate the recognition. From my view, who are the leaders? The league offices, quite honestly, are doing a tremendous job and yield a lot of influence. As Terry said, we really need to invest in this stuff and do more. I mean, the opportunity is ripe. We can do a lot more than we're doing. We need to invest in it, and that takes leadership to say we're going to invest in this. I'm fortunate that Arthur Blank owns the Falcons and Atlanta United and invested a ton of money in Mercedes-Benz Stadium and said, we're going to do this. And we're going to do it at the highest level. So it takes that kind of leadership, and it takes some financial investment to be successful. What I'm hoping, though, is that it becomes so obvious to every business that either you move in this direction and you lead, or someone's going to eat your lunch. So I think sustainability is a threat or an opportunity. And it's something that you can't ignore. 10 years ago, you could ignore it. Even 5 years ago, you could ignore it. I don't think you can going forward. And I think it started with the youth movement, really, because the youth are going to be the consumers for the next 50, 60, 70 years. And that's what's going to drive businesses to act. And hopefully those are people who are going to be voting and is going to drive government. So I really am encouraged about the consumer movement and the youth movement in particular. And the things that I think that have big leverage points, and obviously I'll put a plug in for the Green Sports Alliance. We've had an influence over 10 years. But when I see the United Nations working with the International Olympic Committee, and I see FIFA doing really aggressive sustainability programs and mandating it, and they have unbelievable clout. I would love to see the NCAA use their clout to say, you're going to do this. And here, when you put a bid together, you tell me what you're going to do for sustainability, and not just in the back pages of the RFP, but front and center as a strategic initiative. And I'm not picking on the NCAA. They've done some good work, but I really like what I see out of the IOC and what I see out of FIFA. And they really do have the power to define the game. And I think they realize the power of doing that, the value of doing that, the necessity of doing that, and taking their leadership position and using it to drive change. So I'm really encouraged when I see it at that level and that scale. And we're going to be fortunate here in North America to host the Men's World Cup in 2026. And so as we're starting to plan things now around our zero waste initiative and creating circular economy solutions at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Quite honestly, I'm looking 6 years ahead to say, boy, if we can do it here as a platform, as a pilot with Coca-Cola in our backyard, and show how we can transform Atlanta and the mindset of our consumers and our fans. Imagine if we can do that across every venue that hosts a World Cup match in 2026.
Yep. Well, and a quick point before we turn to Terry on that I wanted to follow up on. I'm on the FIFA 2026 bid committee here in Orlando, and I know Atlanta and Orlando are in the top 19 right now. We're hopeful that our Southeast cluster may win out. But I've been impressed at, as you mentioned, FIFA's priority around this sustainability is no longer in the back of the line. They required an entire committee to be assembled across departmental, across sectors, for us to pull together best practices and really start to plan ahead of the game and look holistically, at this framework around sustainability for the built environment. And we look at it in these various different lenses, but from a built environment standpoint, from a clean energy standpoint, zero waste, local food, water, transportation, even the interaction with the surrounding ecology and your natural systems, those 7 kind of pillars are the way that we look at this topic in Orlando, and they really covered it in these applications. So it's encouraging to see those large leagues, especially one like FIFA that's global and followed by billions, to really start to prioritize that for humanity.
And before I throw it to Terry, I got one thing to add to that, in talking about sustainable development goals, because students might not be so familiar with that, and that's one thing that I've learned over the last 15 years, as my thinking evolves. To get people to move and to change and to pay attention, you've got to get it in their head and you got to get in their heart. And I think when you talk about the sustainable development goals, you start to talk about people and the impacts it has on people. And they all relate back to sustainability. But when you talk about climate change and temperature and extreme weather events, people don't really relate to that until it affects them personally. And this big freight train of climate change is coming at us, but we don't perceive it because it's not here, it's not me, it's not now, most often. And so I think when you boil it down to the construct of the sustainable development goals, it wraps purpose around what you're doing that ties back to sustainability. So, and it makes it more local and meaningful to people. So I would encourage folks to study up on the sustainable development goals that the UN is promoting.
Chris, did you want to add to that?
Oh, no, go for it, Terry.
We're stealing Terry's time.
No. I'm enjoying it. I'm glad you brought up the SDGs. I'm enjoying this. I think there's, as far as leadership, I'll pick on a few things here. I think moving forward, we got to change status quo. And I think it's corporations have to pivot a little bit. When you look at sustainability, are the leaders dictating messaging that the hundreds of thousands of employees may not be behind? Is there a platform of really sharing a voice of the employees that buys into this? I don't know if that exists, and I think it needs to, especially Scott, to your point. These are the future consumers and stewards of the planet. So I think, to your point, FIFA and IOC, they're grabbing the leadership handle and running with it. But where are sponsors on that? Sponsors have been committed to sustainability. They have planning. I think they should have led on this. They should have led and said, here's what to align our values, here's what we need. And they really could have changed the dynamics, I think, with fans with that. So they really need to get involved. And they need to get involved on multiple issues. CTE is one. Sponsors benefit from these athletes who are getting brain damage. I mean, we know enough about CTE, but we don't know nearly enough. We need research. So I think if you're going to benefit from a stance, you need to invest in research, because those are your stakeholders. Sports betting. It's amazing to me that we're living in an age of sustainability where we're trying to stave off, we're trying to be futuristic and stave off problems. And yet for money, we're embracing something we know is damaging to society. So I'm one of those that I don't understand why we're embracing sports betting, just for revenues. Plastic pollution is another one. I think when we look at going forward with sponsors, they're going to be under more and more of a microscope. Do they align with the values? And I think we need to be careful of that. Gender pay inequality. If you're going to take a stance on social issues like gender pay inequality, you better be living them. And some companies are not. And I think there's some sustainability washing going on. We saw greenwashing previously. Now we're seeing sustainability washing. And I think we need to push back a little bit and make sure that we're in line with our commitments and what we say. So it's from a leadership standpoint, there's a lot of people, I think, leading. I just went through the ocean race with Megan Jones. She's a great leader in this space. I think Arthur, I can remember when Arthur's office 10 years ago was LEED Gold. You know, this isn't something he stumbled upon. It wasn't something he was forced into. This is a belief that's genuine from him. There's a lot of great owners, but I'd probably put him at the top because he really is genuine about this. Again, I think we need the people coming up through employment, the youth of today, to at least have a voice. They might not have all the answers. We don't expect them to, but I think they need to share in that. Scott, you know, your point on influencing fans is critical. I think one of the problems we have in the industry is the nomenclature is getting very confused. We don't, and we started this off, Mark. I don't know if we understand what sustainability is from an industry standpoint, sharing that messaging versus green versus CSR. And I think that confusion, if we're all confused and using it in different ways, how can we educate other people on it? So I think we need to come together and be concise on messaging. I think that's a very important action that we can all take together.
One important takeaway that I wanted to share here is that leadership really needs to be seen in across sectoral, right? It's not just about the actual sports leagues or the individual owners of these properties. You know, there are leaders in government and private sector and nonprofits and civil society. Across the board, we are seeing an uprising of leadership in the space. And that's the reason why we're seeing the critical mass, right? Terry, you talked about we've had these lulls of priority around sustainability, and now we're seeing this skyrocket. I think the change in momentum is because it's being addressed at multiple angles. And it's being addressed at the individual level, at the government level, at the business level, at the consumer level. And everybody is realizing that we play a role in shaping a cleaner, healthier, more prosperous future for all. It's not going to be one pillar. It cannot be government alone or business alone. And that type of collaboration and partnership is really allowing this movement to accelerate to the degree that it needs to.
I want to ask a quick follow-up, kind of based on what Terry said about, you know, making sure you're living the values that you talk about. What should people look at as the authentic versus maybe things that are just done at a PR level or something that might be a little bit more surface level? I mean, you want that conversation regardless, but I imagine there's certain things that are really making a difference, and then there's certain companies or organizations who might just want to have a good soundbite around it. How can people kind of see the difference between what's authentic and what's kind of just for show?
So the greenwashed versus not, so to speak, right? And
yeah.
I think, you know, to me, it's blatantly obvious, but I think I'm so ingrained in it that it's difficult for me to pull my perspective apart a little bit. Of course, recycling has been around for decades, right? And so a lot of people will focus on recycling or say that they recycle, and maybe a back of house cardboard recycling effort, but the vast majority of the venue isn't taking advantage of recycling, right? And trying to divert that waste. And so they may be promoting the fact that they're recycling, and it may be at the surface level, but not really trying to look holistically at what we're doing at Amway Center or my Mercedes-Benz Center, where it's full scale integration of recycling, food waste collection, even liquids, coming down to the point of how do we get some of this stuff out of the landfill and repurpose it on site. As Terry was mentioning, there are technologies now. I think when it comes down to the actual facility, right, there are buildings that are to the code, which I call the worst buildings to build by law. And then there are those that are verified third party, essentially, that are meeting these higher performance metrics, whether it's lower energy use intensity and water use intensity, whether it's their greenhouse gas emissions footprint, or they're trying to generate power on site, what they're doing for waste diversion, all of these things play into a role. And so the facility and getting these buildings to be LEED certified, gold and platinum, is a huge deal. I mean, that's not just a small, anecdote. That is something, and for those who have gone through the LEED certification process, it is a process, and it is rigorous, and it is verified and scrutinized by third-party reviewers. It's not something that's easy to go through and just check a box. So I think, we have to look holistically at the facility, at the operations, and really understand that framework I talked about around buildings, energy, water, food, waste, transportation, and natural systems and ecology, right? How do all of those components play a role in any given institution or venue? And I think that's the lens that I approach usually this topic.
And I agree with all that. And I would add just really simply, it's more about what you do than what you say. Pay more attention to what people are actually doing. It's one thing to say something or paint a picture or paint something in a certain light, but people are generally pretty smart, and they'll pick you apart if you're just saying it and not really doing it. So I think that your actions speak way louder than your words, and that's the danger of talking about it, is being a bit vulnerable. If as much as we're proud of Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I would be the first to say that we're less bad than other venues. We're not neutral, we're not beneficial. We're trying to be, and we are maybe in some ways, but it is nice to have a third party talk about you and have a third party process that certifies it. As we go through this big initiative to make our stadium a zero waste stadium, and had we had the Final Four there as we had planned, we were very confident we could hit a 90% waste diversion rate for the whole weekend, and achieve zero waste. And we're looking at getting third party certified as a zero waste venue. So we know that what we say has some importance, but it's really more important what you do, and especially if somebody who is credible can verify it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the things we all are aware of are the youth today and how they will gravitate towards purchasing product that has causes behind it. Mm-hmm. I think that can be taken advantage of. 1, 2, I don't know if there's an ability for them to be educated on what companies are truly behind causes, and the product they're buying, does it have cause really behind it? I think a lot of this research is pre-purchase. It's based on intent versus post-purchase, where you can really see that they're doing that. I think there needs to be some platforms we can all develop. I mean, we've been looking at developing a platform where sponsors can look at events and see how sustainable they are and the point of entry. Do they support them where there's an opportunity for them to help them be neutral or positive, or even just better, to Scott's point, or do they say no because of the impact? I think the same with purchasing product. There has to be a platform where you can go in with an app and look up products and say, okay, this is one I should be buying. I don't think that exists to my knowledge. I think there's a great opportunity for us to lead in a lot of these ways, but there's a lot that can be done.
I think each of you provides just tremendous examples of, the organizations and the initiatives that people are taking on in sustainability. But, let's take a deeper dive into sustainability. What are the core pillars? How are they being measured? And then one more question to add on that is, how are smart cities and governments supporting, this movement going forward?
So starting out, I think you'll be impressed when you start to look across this country and really around the world at local government leadership in the space of sustainability. We've seen, especially over the last 3 to 4 years, a significant rise in focus around hiring sustainability officers and directors that are not just being hidden in a public works department, but are truly part of the organization's administration and executive level of decision making. And here in Orlando, we're fortunate to have that. In 2007, Mayor Dyer launched Greenworks Orlando, which is the brand that we run off of. And I talked about these 7 key focus areas, but again, we look at it in the lens of, first and foremost, the built environment and our buildings, right? Buildings in Orlando and most large urban settings contribute to over 70% of carbon emissions associated with their communities. For us, it's actually 75% of carbon emissions are associated with buildings using energy, then that energy being dirty and polluting, right? And only 25% coming from the transportation sector. And you can imagine the amount of load that we have in the hospitality arena of hotels and theme parks, of course, our downtown major central business districts and our homes and multifamily. You know, buildings don't have a smokestack on top of them showing these emissions, but believe it or not, their carbon footprint is much larger in the grand scheme of things. And that all depends on, of course, the energy supply, you know, in your grid. And so that's the second key pillar is what is that energy mix that's powering your city? Traditionally, we've been, you know, powering this country and this world off of coal and seemingly natural gas now, moving towards that much quicker. And we need to move into a direction that we can power ourselves with clean, renewable energy sources. Here in Orlando, we've made a commitment to move our electric grid to 100% renewables for city operations by 2030 and the entire citywide by 2050. And I'm happy to say that this year, Amway Center, Camping World Center, as well as all of our fire stations, police headquarters, and our emergency operations center will be 100% powered by solar, including that Amway Center through our solar farms. So energy is critical. The next pillar for me is often on the waste environment. And we talk about this notion of zero waste or 90+% diversion from the landfill. And holistically, we look at this in a lot of different ways. Obviously, not just your traditional single stream recycling, but organics are becoming more and more of an issue, and realizing that a lot of emissions, methane emissions that we're realizing contributing to this problem are coming from organics decomposing in our landfills. And so we have in Orlando here lifted up a program where we're collecting organics at businesses, including our venues, Amway and Camping World and the soccer stadium. And that all gets taken to an anaerobic digester, a waste to energy plant that turns that organics into renewable natural gas. That RNG turns into electricity and is exported onto the grid. So now we've created this closed loop system, and we're able to reutilize that waste in a better way. But it's not just about organics, it's also grease and e-waste and textiles. So it's holistic on the waste side. The fourth pillar I often look at is local food systems. The entire industrial agricultural system, not only in this country, but globally, contributes to about 20% of global climate change emissions as well. And that's primarily because of land use change and deforestation. We're seeing that a lot in the Amazon, right? Because we're taking out the Amazon so that we can have more land for cattle. So that we can grow more cattle. So one is land use change. The second is emissions from those animals and their contribution, to the planet. So on the food side, we have to start to localize as much as possible and move towards more of a plant-based diet. And so we've tried to infuse that throughout our venues here in the city of Orlando, really sourcing locally as much as possible and doing our best to offer vegetarian and vegan options because more and more of our population is being sensitive. They are trying to be more responsible with their diets. And it's one of the things that each one of us can do. We often do it 2 and 3 times a day, that we can impact the planet in a positive way. The fifth kind of pillar I look at is the notion around water, right? And in Florida, water is such a sensitive topic. We're surrounded by water, but we're also dependent on a very finite pool of clean water resources under us, the Floridan aquifer. And I'm sad to say that over the last 2 to 3 decades, we've seen drastic decline in outputs of our freshwater springs and the amount of consumptive use permits we're able to pull from the aquifer. We're being told by water management districts, you all have to find alternative water supply, whatever that might mean. That could be desalination, that could be surface water with purification. There's a lot of things we have to deal with, but if anything is a linchpin to growth of the economy and prosperity, it's water resources. Look what happened with Cape Town not too long ago, right? Where they were literally down to the last drop trying to figure out how am I gonna, millions of people were being affected, right? And so water we look at from both a quantity of consumption standpoint, but also quality. What are we doing that is impacting water quality and minimizing nutrient pollution, minimizing a lot of pesticides and chemicals that we're using around these venues has a drastic impact on water quality. Sixth pillar for me is this notion around transportation and mobility, right? That is that 25% in Orlando's contribution is coming from our vehicles using diesel and gasoline primarily. And so venues are more and more prioritizing electric vehicle parking and ensuring that as we build these new venues and retrofitting them, that we have EV charging stations, and ideally solar powered EV charging stations with covering. We're moving towards transit oriented development, trying to encourage the use of multimodal transportation, get people on our Sunrail and on the Lynx buses and the limo buses, and using micromobility, right? Scooters and bike share is a hot topic right now. People love them. We want to encourage more use of them, and that's going to be critical. So transportation, we're doing a lot to electrify transportation. A lot of electric buses coming now to Orlando, and so we're really ramping up EV buses. And then of course the Virgin train coming from, you know, that high-speed rail coming from Miami is going to be a game changer for Orlando. The last pillar is that natural systems and ecology, and that's really how do we find this balance between the natural world and the built environment. And we have to come to a point where not only are we neutral, but as Scott continues to say, we move into regeneration. I think we're a little ways out from figuring out regeneration systems, but we need to have that as the vision on the horizon as we move up down this chain. So ensuring for us that we're trying to equip native and Florida-friendly landscaping, that we're really focused on protection of natural lands and our wetlands, especially in Florida. This becomes a really contentious issue around development. And so more and more we're trying to figure out how do we find that balance? How do we proliferate the growth of wildlife habitats, share this, you know, our communities with other natural beings that we live with. And so those are the 7 pillars, right, that I often look at any given project. And when we approach it that way, we can really be more responsible in these types of developments. Sorry to be on that soapbox a little bit in terms of walking us through that mindset there.
Chris, you nailed it. I couldn't really add anything to it other than just to highlight a couple of things. One is water is such a thing that we take for granted. And when we don't have it, we're in big trouble. And it's amazing how many communities are kind of living on the edge that people don't even know it. They have no idea. But you imagine living a day without water and tell me what your life's like. It doesn't work. So that's a definitely undervalued, underappreciated resource that we take for granted every day. I absolutely agree with you. Local government can really drive the game. It's so hard on a big scale, whether it's state or nationally, although we were doing a lot better with the prior administration in the EPA than we are doing now. We need good leadership at the national level, but you can certainly get a lot more done locally, and I applaud you guys for what you're doing. So city planning, having those sustainability departments and really having a holistic plan like you have in Orlando is really something. And then I love the fact that you talk about organics, because that's another piece of the puzzle that people don't appreciate soil. They have no idea how valuable, how important it is. And so I'll suggest that people get online and look up the compost story. It's by a group called Kiss the Ground, the compost story. And it's about a 5-minute video. It's somewhat entertaining and very educational. And hopefully that'll get people to start thinking about what they do with organics and how important soil is.
Fun fact real quick, a residential program that we have is we offer in Orlando free 80-gallon composters to every resident in the city of Orlando that wants one. They go on our website, they fill out a simple form, and we literally assemble it and deliver it to their door. They come home from work, it's there. And we have now over 8,000 households in Orlando composting, actually taking their food scraps from their homes and creating soil in their backyard that they can either repurpose in a home garden, put around their trees and shrubs. And it's gotten so popular now that people in apartment complexes have been reaching out saying, how do we go about diverting our food waste? And so now we have a new public drop-off program at farmers markets. We now have a bin set up where somebody can come and dump their organics into this overall bin, and then we take that to that anaerobic digester, that waste to energy plant. And so organics, definitely an opportunity there. And I'll say that there is a hierarchy of food waste, believe it or not. And first and foremost, we've got to figure out how to get the edible food to those who need it most, right? And so food recovery, or what we call food rescue, is another key part of our organic strategy. Get the food at the Amway Center. that goes in our box offices that is still wrapped perfectly edible and hasn't been touched, and get those to food banks and to homeless shelters so that they can eat them. The next level is get it to animals. If it's not edible by people, get it to be edible by animals. If it's not edible by animals, let's go into anaerobic digestion, then in compost, then in landfill. So there's this hierarchy in thinking about these solutions, and I think to address it meaningfully, we have to look holistically at each one of those pillars.
I think one of the things we need to look at too, circular economy is obviously a big focus right now. And one of the things I'm concerned about is if you're going to have a circular economy, I think we need to ensure that what's in that circular flow is as healthy as can be. And I think you had mentioned recycling. I mean, recent factors came out and said we've only recycled about 9% of the plastic that's been manufactured. We can work towards getting that to 50-60%, but we still have a very negative impact from plastic, especially microplastic, tire dust. We're ingesting, we're inhaling, we're making sporting goods out of captured ocean plastic. I don't know if there's been, I don't know if there's been research on the health ramifications from this. We do know that laundering synthetics is one of the top 3 contributors to ocean plastic. So I think, are we perpetuating the same problems we're seeing? So if we're going to have a circular economy, let's make sure that if plastic's going to be a part of that, we have to look at alternatives down the road, and that should be invested in right away. So I think that's a concern. Circular economy sounds great, but you got to make sure that what's in it isn't toxic. As far as smart cities, from a sponsorship group, representing sponsors, we are supporting Artie Tandon and Smart City Expo Atlanta. She's got a fantastic vision that redefines smart cities beyond just technology, social justice. I mean, she's got something that I think is going to break down and really create a new flow for public-private partnerships. And we're working with the Mayor Hardy Davis of Augusta, Georgia, is doing an incredible job. He's helping us, the African American Mayors Association. There's a lot of groups that are saying, you know what, we do want to work with the private sector on solutions to challenges. So I think we're changing the dynamics of the conversation there and what we can impact. And I think with sports and sustainability, that needs to happen. And we do need to go and really look at that social pillar and look at what it includes: transparency, anti-corruption, diversity and inclusion. There's got to be a lot more stakeholders in the conversation. And I think this is a great time to pivot. I think when we look at COVID-19, the wake-up call for us from a global perspective is it's really impacting people who are not healthy. And I think when you look at diabetes and obesity, from a company standpoint, we've got to do a better job putting out healthy product, putting out products that are beneficial for people. And I think this is a great wake-up call to make that commitment. But we need everybody on board. One other thing I think we're going through right now is trust. There is such mistrust from all levels, political, corporate, whatever it is. We are police brutality. We have got to bring people together and build back up trust, because it's just non-existent right now. And it's going to be very hard to make commitments of change if we don't earn that trust back. So I think that's something that the sports community, through sustainability, really needs to get together and talk about.
Great points, Terry. I just wanted to also harp on the smart cities component, because I missed that going through my framework of sustainability. But we see in Orlando, we call it our Future Ready initiative, because it's really about how do we ensure that we don't get left behind and that we can continue to foster innovation and evolve as a city, be ready for any given shock or stress that hits us in the future. And so I agree with Terry that smart cities is not just about technology, but technology certainly is a key component in the means to the end. We still have our goal of achieving 100% renewable clean energy for the city of Orlando. How we get there is going to be a technological move to accelerate that goal. And so how can we infuse? And that's why, our Future Ready plan has the same 7 pillars essentially as our Greenworks Sustainability Action Plan. But now with those 7 pillars in a new perspective, how do we co-create and solve communities' most pressing challenges in the 21st century by leveraging this notion around technology, around community input and engagement, and around environmentally responsible development, right? And so it really is quite exciting to see where things are kind of going in this space.
So guys, you guys touched on this a bit in your kind of detailed analysis, but I want to kind of dive into it. Terry, you even touched on it a bit more from your IMG world. Understanding kind of where we are with smart cities, understanding where we are with the idea of sustainability moving forward. How do you see all these industries converging onto creating what we consider ideal state, right? What do you see? How do you see that happening? How do you see all these industries, all these different interests converging onto trying to create what a perceived ideal state could be with sustainability and the intersection of sports?
I think we're still figuring out, each sector's role in advancing a sustainable future. I've been fortunate to be part of a lot of the United Nations discussions, both here in Brazil for Rio+20. I've been out in Germany a number of times, engaging at the UN. And what's interesting is they, at that level, they're able to convene a lot of these sectors together to figure out what that ideal end state is. And I want to just double down on that sustainable development goals. The SDGs is that global framework of 17 global goals that is going to move humanity in a more equitable and a more responsible and a more environmentally friendly direction. And that seems to be the framework to get to the ideal state. If we can tick off and begin addressing those goals, and we are now, we've been in it since 2015 when they were launched, and they go out to the year of 2030, so it's a 15-year horizon, and 2020 to 2030 are going to be absolutely critical in kind of achieving these goals of eliminating poverty, continuing to reduce inequalities around the world, but at the same time move in a direction that grows our economy but doesn't destroy the planet. And that's that delicate balance we're trying to get to. There's an economist that I've started to really, really embrace more of, and it's called donut economics. If you get a chance, look up donut economics. Kate Raworth, who's written a book and a TEDx on this, but it's a different perspective on the economy that takes into account the social foundation and the planetary boundaries of which we've identified, and the goal being getting to zero, right? Getting to neutral state where everybody on this planet has that social foundation to thrive, and we're not kind of going outside of the boundaries of the natural resources that the planet provides us every single day, right? And so donut economics, I think, has gotten the closest to identifying what does a true economy look like in this state of sustainability, right? What is that from an economic perspective? How do we continue to create jobs and grow capitalism, et cetera, but do so in this framework around social inclusion and environmental responsibility?
I think it's interesting too, because Orlando and Kiel, you really opened my eyes to this. It's taking a great leadership role and has been with sustainability as a city and its planning. You look at the branding from this standpoint, a city's identity, and of course Atlanta has got a really positive and I think important technology platform here and growing. But I think cities need to learn from each other and really look at what's important and take all the aspects of a city that they can within their limitations and really commit maybe their own role and how that plugs into the bigger role. But it's amazing to see these cities really dive deep on the investment, and it's exciting. I don't think a lot of people realize what's going on with this and how it influences the consumer and citizen. We talk about venues being innovation labs for smart cities. I think hospitals, schools could probably serve the same purpose, but there is a great passion behind sports teams and their venues. And between technology and environmental controls, what we can do with stadiums to benefit smart cities is really crucial. But again, I think we need to get consensus on this from all the stakeholders and involvement. And I think obviously we need to improve the relationships between the public and private sector for this to really be maximized. And I think that's starting to go on. And again, we touched on leadership, and it takes leadership from all sides. So it's exciting to see what's going to happen. And this is going to be, we're going through a very tumultuous period. We're being challenged. but I think out of that, there's going to be a lot of positive impact.
Just listening to this episode today, there's just so much to learn. I think you said it really well there, Terry. There's just so much information that people don't know right now, and this episode has highlighted so many areas that I think are important for students to do some research in, because they're really going to drive opportunities of where new jobs are going to be in the future. There's going to be whole verticals of jobs that support a lot of the initiatives that you shared today on the podcast. So, in wrap up, what we like to do is have each of you just kind of look down right directly into the barrel of the camera and, leave with a personal note for the students.
Right now, we're at a critical point in our history. And what you do beyond your studies at your university, in this case, the University of Central Florida, is going to dictate our future. It's going to dictate how we evolve as a society. And one thing I encourage everybody, no matter the discipline that you're in, no matter if you're studying education or studying sports medicine or studying environmental science or engineering, everyone will play a role in moving society in a sustainable direction. No matter the role that you play, everybody will have a role to play. And I'm optimistic, because I see that the greatest opportunity, the greatest economic development and job creation opportunity of this century is going to be positioning ourselves in this sustainable direction. It's going to be jobs around retrofitting our homes and our buildings. It's going to be jobs around improving overall social equity and the digital divide. It'll be jobs around providing the necessary infrastructure so that everybody has the right chance to thrive in their life. And so I encourage you and empower you to think about how your passions align with the future that you want it to be, right? How your passions and your skills and your talents can contribute towards cleaner, healthier, and more prosperous communities, both here in Orlando and beyond. And so don't hesitate to reach out, continue to build your network, get engaged and volunteer your time, whether it's for a nonprofit or a business, to get experience. And that will certainly set you apart and help you continue to thrive in your career.
And I hope we can catch up again soon. And if anybody out there listening can, make it to Mercedes-Benz Stadium and visit us on a match day, a game day, or whatever, reach out to me. I'm always happy to have people shadow and share what I can about how we operate the stadium. So lots of great things to chew on here at this call, and I appreciate being a part of it.
Youth is the future, and we need to embrace that. You have such a critical role to play. And you need to be hungry for information, hungry for growing. Never stop learning, and do embrace your passion. But look and learn from others, and look towards how you can make an impact in what's going on. And that is really paying attention and getting involved.
Join us next episode to discuss emerging technology with Abhishek Binyaka of Specticom, Amanda Stern with the Canadian Olympic Committee, and Costa Claudianos of Tennis Canada.